You know, a little while ago, we talked about on the show that the city of New York was implementing rules now that you were going to have to show proof of vaccination in order to do a number of indoor activities, restaurants, bars, gyms. We weren't sure if that included movie theaters, but it turns out it does. It includes movie theaters, which was key to what we were talking about, and of course, regular live on stage theaters as well. And we talked about wondering if this was something as the Delta variant cases start to spike, at least among those who are not vaccinated. As Delta variants start to spike and all that kind of stuff, we wondered about whether or not other cities and areas in the US would start to implement the same rules. Well, we got an answer for that because according to the Los Angeles Times, and this has been reported in a number of outlets, Los Angeles City Council has just passed a resolution that was unanimous that is going to implement similar rules in Los Angeles. Now, it doesn't go into effect right away. They have to pass it on to a particular board that has to figure out how to implement it. But it looks like this is coming to Los Angeles. We're in Los Angeles. Movie theaters, restaurants, stores, gyms, bars, things like that. You're going to have to show proof of vaccination in order to be able to enter the facilities. Now, of course, the main thing we're concerned about here and that we're wondering about here is how this affects movie going and movie theater going. And Rob, I remember you and I talked about this when we discussed the New York situation, because we said it could be a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Like, because on one hand, it, for people who are vaccinated but still nervous about Delta variant being too close to infected people, it may be very encouraging for them to go, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to go out to the movies now because I know the only people who are going to be in that theater are people who are vaccinated. Yay. But the other side of that coin, of course, the other edge of the sword is the fact that, this basically cuts out 47% of the population I mean, there's a little bit higher than that in Los Angeles, but it cuts out a significant chunk of the demographic who could possibly go to see the movies. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I know there are a lot of people celebrating this. There are some people decrying it. For me, I got to say, I personally like the move. I do. I mean, it's still up to an individual to choose to get vaccinated or not, but it just now means that people who don't want to be around unvaccinated people don't need to be. So I can see both sides of the argument. I lean towards liking this move. Rob, what do you think about this move and specifically how it's going to impact movie going in Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, it's infections have gone up 700% amongst unvaccinated people. I think it's just academic, really. I mean, I mean, I know it becomes a civil rights issue or for people, but there's also we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and for me, I'll go to the movies more with the assurance that people have to show vaccination cards. It just makes it, because just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean you can't get the virus. It mitigates circumstances and what can happen, but we can all become reinfected. I mean, it's not the vaccination is not it's not some kind of it's not plot armor. It's not gonna, but so you can still get sick. It just makes it so it mitigates the effects. So I would just rather not be around anyone that's unvaccinated, just as a matter of course. I mean, and I think we're seeing that play out in our cities, and we're seeing the situation is getting worse. The transmission is getting worse, and people who are unvaccinated become incubators for disease. And epidemiology is not a difficult science to understand. I mean, I think it's a good thing.
Now, one argument that I've heard some people mention, guys, is that, a study came out the other day showing that around the country, basically, it's generally around the 97% mark. 97% of COVID cases right now are amongst unvaccinated people. In Los Angeles, it's even higher. It's about 98% of COVID cases in the Los Angeles area now are unvaccinated people. About 2% are vaccinated. So one argument I've heard from people is saying, if you're vaccinated, why do you care if somebody besides you is unvaccinated? Like, you got a massive chance of still being perfectly fine, but there's still that 2%, a little bit of a thing there. So that could be a bit of a problem. Aaron, I know you and I, we were talking privately about this, I think about a week ago, about vaccinations, the move by New York and stuff like that. Are you surprised that Los Angeles is following the same route? Do you think it's a good idea? And how do you see this specifically affecting, the art of movie going and people going to the theaters here?
I'm not surprised at all. As soon as I heard that it was happening in New York, I knew that we were going to be next. And especially once once businesses started overwhelmingly and gleefully accepting this, yes, of course, there were businesses that said, no, that's, it's bullshit. We shouldn't have to do this. But a lot of businesses in New York said, yes, please, and thank you. And a lot of their patrons said, yes, please, and thank you as well. And there were certainly people who were naysayers and were disappointed, as there always will be. There's so many reasons why I am in strong support of this. Number one, children have to be vaccinated in order to be able to go to public school. They have to have their basic, Tdap and whooping cough. They have to have their basic vaccinations. Why? To protect the students that they go to school with, to protect students who are potentially immunocompromised, and also so that these things don't become massive outbreaks. And because there are so many parents who refuse to vaccinate their children, we've seen diseases from the 1800s rear back, and all of a sudden there's a whooping cough outbreak and people get so upset about that. That is what we're trying to prevent happening here. The reason why there is a Delta variant, the reason why this thing keeps mutating is because we have not been able to reach herd immunity. Back before there was a vaccine, the people who were advocating for no mask wearing were saying, oh, let's let everybody get COVID and then we'll have herd immunity. Yeah, we'll also lose a percentage of the population, and that is many, many people, like in the millions. So no, that's not a good way to do that. The way of reaching herd immunity is for enough people in the country to be vaccinated so that this thing doesn't have the ability to find hosts and mutate. And as Rob and John, you were both saying, the predominant number of people who are getting really sick and being hospitalized and dying from this are people who are unvaccinated. Yes, I, as a vaccinated person, can carry it and I can spread it. But, in the case of my friend Nick Cordero, who was 42 years old, perfectly healthy, spent 99 days in ICU and ultimately died from complications of COVID. It wasn't the fact that he got COVID. People go, well, I got COVID and I was fine. It's about the viral load. It's about the amount of COVID, of the infection that is in your body. People who are vaccinated don't transfer as much of a viral load, and therefore the person that they might infect is not going to get as sick. So I think this is a great idea. I understand that, yes, there are still people that for historical reasons have every right to be cautious of the medical industry as a whole. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. Okay. Medical bias 100% and medical racism 100% are real things. And I understand that hesitation. What I would encourage anyone who is coming from that perspective to do is to talk to other people in your community, talk to your church leaders, talk to doctors, that are in your community and get their perspective on it. Don't just talk to your mom or your best friend or your neighbor. And for people that are just going to alternative media sites and looking up stuff, please go to the people. My sister-in-law is one of the top infectious diseases doctors at Penn. She has been our go-to for information. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have her as a resource. But we have to start listening to the science. And while, yes, there may have been some outlying cases of people having adverse effects to the vaccine, they are in the far, far, far inferior number to the number of people that we've lost to COVID. And the only way that we are going to get out of this thing is if we all come together, look at our fellow neighbor and say, hey, I'm not just doing this for my health. I'm doing this for the health and safety of everyone around me. That's the only way we're going to get through this. So yes, I'm a big supporter of this. And if this means that one more person gets vaccinated and doesn't either die themselves or spread enough of a viral load to their neighbor to kill their neighbor, then great, I'm all for it. And you know what? If you have a problem with this and you think this violates your civil liberties, well, then clearly you shouldn't be wearing your seatbelt in your car. And clearly you shouldn't be taking off your shoes at airports. You know what? We haven't had anybody try to bring a shoe bomb into an airport that we know of for 20 years. Yet for some reason, I still can't bring a bottle of shampoo into the airport. So these are all things that we have to do. We have to sacrifice some of our freedoms so that everyone else can, whether or not it's, just something to make everybody feel better. We have to do this for the sake of everyone's health.
So, guys, we're seeing this now in New York. We're seeing this in Los Angeles. We're seeing how this is now affecting the places you can go, particularly movie theaters. What do you guys think about this? And do you think now that the two biggest cities in the U.S. are implementing these things, do you think it's going to spread a little bit further? What are you guys thinking about that? Jump down to the comment section below and let us know your thoughts.